NASA's Artemis 2 and the so-called return to Earth. They never left Earth. Everything was filmed in a studio with the so-called space mission. And as always, garbage footage with the capsule supposedly returning to Earth. As you can see. Let's take a look at this footage and take a look at this garbage. This visualization of the capsule returning to Earth. And let's take a look here. As it supposedly comes back down to Earth. I'm going to get into that in a little bit. And how they managed to fool the world with the capsule supposedly coming back from space. But first off, let's take a look at this footage. And you're going to see several parachutes. Smaller ones. And then you're going to see larger ones coming out in different sequences. And you're going to see this one disconnect and the larger parachutes come out with this capsule. Of course, we don't have any footage of inside the capsule. We can't have that because these capsules are empty. 100% empty. And you're going to see these three parachutes open up. I'm going to show exactly how they stage all this. It's just like a movie, of course, just like a movie production where they just put clips together. And of course, this is only footage provided by NASA. No other media is allowed to film this. And this is how they get away with the deception. Only they film it just like SpaceX. And look at that splashdown. Look how hard that capsule splashes down in the water. And that's a pretty impactful hit. Let's get a little bit of a close-up. And let's take, again, a closer look at this splashdown. And the impact with the, if any so-called astronauts are inside this capsule, they'd be broken bones. And that little dinky capsule coming down at full force from outer space. And again, absolutely no way. Let's play this at normal speed. Just take a look at that. There's absolutely no way they would be okay if anybody was inside that capsule. Again, just smoke and mirrors. And this is what they do with these capsules. They're just loaded in the back of these large airplanes with the U.S. Air Force. As you can see a little bit of a close-up here. They've done this going back in time. This is all the way back to 1963. The same exact thing. And you see it loaded here with this one particular capsule before it's dumped out the cargo bay while in flight. And that gets to this. There is a ship nearby for the extraction of the astronauts. And you're going to see here the footage of the capsule in the water itself. And then you're going to see there's a ship in the background here. And this is where it gets to be really ridiculous with this production. Let's continue on. And I'll get into it. As far as, again, the rescue extraction of the astronauts. You see all the rafts here. And it's very poor quality footage. 720p when I downloaded this from NBC. And you don't see any close-ups of the astronauts. It could be anybody. And that's exactly what it is. It is anybody. But the astronauts are just actors. It's just like a movie where they use stunt actors, stunt men, stunt women to play the role of the individuals. And you hear all the bogus clapping. And again, you see all the rafts around the capsule itself in the water. And this is off the coast of San Diego, southwest of San Diego. A desolate area where there's not a lot of people around. Of course, no one's allowed around this area. Now, this doesn't make sense. So you saw those rafts around the astronauts. And why use a helicopter to do this so-called extraction rescue mission? Why not just charter a boat? and bring the astronauts back to that ship that we saw with all the crew members on the deck. This is 100% theater, and of course we cannot see any of the astronauts here. And look at all the ripples in the water from the helicopter. Very, very poor quality video, so obviously we cannot pick up any faces. And one thing to mention, you're going to see a quick cut because you don't see this actual individual here, the rescue worker, actually attached to anybody here. And they just cut away. You're going to see it momentarily. And there you see the so-called rescue worker. And he's going to bring up one of the so-called astronauts. And I really have to emphasize, why not just charter a boat and just have them brought back to the main ship? This is obviously too dangerous to do in a real-life situation. It doesn't make sense. This is part of the World Stage Theater. Here's the cutaway film. You don't see them actually being connected and being lifted up at that moment. You see the very tail end of it. And obviously, like I said, there's no way to identify if this is one of those so-called astronauts such as Reed Wiseman. This is, again, too dangerous, too risky in a real-life situation. Just bring them aboard a boat and then bring that boat to the main ship. That very simple. And here's another helicopter. A second helicopter coming in. And look at all those waves. What if something went wrong with this helicopter? With all these individuals. Way too risky, like I said. And one thing I should have mentioned too, as they bring in the so-called astronauts aboard the helicopter, there's no video footage of anybody inside the helicopter. No astronauts being filmed, of course, because there are no real astronauts on this raft. And they're not being so-called rescued. This is basically just a drill that you see taking place here for public consumption. And again, I'm going to say it. I said it twice already, but for the third time, why not just get a boat? Charter a boat. So much easier to do it that way. And again, no camera crew to film the astronaut being rescued. Why not show that? Because obviously there's not really astronauts aboard this raft to rescue. This raft is only 3,000 yards away from the ship. But they have to use a helicopter. And here's the third run as they pick up a non-astronaut from this raft. What a complete joke this is. How much money is being wasted with these so-called missions to outer space? And again, this movie production concludes where they show the so-called astronauts sitting in the helicopter when it gets to the ship. Nothing they do is ever legit. Nothing that they do is ever real. What a colossal waste of money. And here you see the astronauts right here. This is the only time you see them after they're already aboard the ship. And they're just filming them with the helicopter on the helipad. And this concludes the absolute debacle with Artemis 2. And again, how people buy this is beyond me. And footage that I want to cover here from the so-called return of astronaut Scott Kelly and cosmonaut Mikhail Kornienko. I covered this back in 2016, 10 years ago, showing the fakery. So people that believe that it's impossible that all these space agencies throughout the world could be working together. Obviously, it's called the International Space Station, so they are working together. But the point is, after a year, you have Scott Kelly and Mikhail Kornienko supposedly returning back from Earth again for a year in so-called space aboard the ISS. And you're going to see this garbage footage coming up with this return, with this capsule. And take a look here. I'm going to speed this up here. I'm going to move it forward as they make their return, so-called return to Earth. Take a look at this footage. Absolute garbage that you're going to see here. You see the capsule. And this is supposedly the ball Earth, the globe they're returning to. Now watch this. As you see this garbage capsule, it looks like a bad Atari 2600 game. And it makes its way through the so-called atmosphere of Earth. And what do you magically see from there? You get this. A parachute with the capsule attached and a single parachute with this return. How do you go from this? Anybody want to explain this? How do you go from this to a capsule dangling from a single parachute? What a complete joke. And again, in a desolate area for those that are supposed to see it, the production crew, with this garbage fakery here. And again, it's just with these capsules, just jumped off the back end of a cargo plane. And you have obviously the single parachute here, like I mentioned. And then you're going to get here where they show the very tail end of the capsule. They don't show it actually hit the ground. They just show the capsule. And they're pulling out. As you see here, Scott Kelly and again Kornienko. And obviously this proves that Russia and U.S. have been always working. They still are, as far as this space deception. And there you see Scott Kelly, like he calmed something. You would think after being in space for a year, he'd be skinny as a pencil, only eating rations. There's no way he would be this size, this girth. And look at as they haul away this piece of garbage. Scott Kelly. What a complete joke this is. Everybody here, of course, knows this is just a production, obviously. Or they wouldn't be allowed anywhere near this. And there's Kornienko as well. I'm going to get towards the end here where they show them. And again, he would definitely be skinny as a pencil, just eating rations in space, so-called space. No man, no woman has ever been in space. There's no so-called deep space. All we have is inner space. And again, I have to emphasize, just smoke and mirrors, nothing more than a movie production, what it comes down to. In conclusion, people need to wake up and realize how deep the deception goes and how all these countries are working together against us.
John chapter 9, verse 25. Whereas once I was blind, now I can see. Now I can see.